I did something really, really stupid one time from which I should have died. It was in 1977. Now, that's not necessarily the last time I did something stupid. But I do remember this one in 1977. I went to a picnic with a group of friends, and I did not anticipate that I was going to swim. And so as a result, I was in blue jeans and tennis shoes and socks and a shirt, and everybody else there had brought their swimsuits. And so they all wanted to go swimming, and there were some very nice young ladies there, and I wanted to go swimming too. So I decided I'll just go swimming in my clothes. It's no problem. And it wasn't a problem as long as we were just diving into the water and getting out. But then the little girls decided that they wanted to swim to an island that was across in the lake. And I thought, man, I don't want them going over that island without me. So I said, I'll go. And I started to swim, and just for those of you who've never tried to swim any long distance in tennis shoes and blue jeans and socks and a shirt, I would recommend you not try it. I swam, and they got farther and farther ahead of me, and I swam, and I don't know how many of you have ever come to the edge of drowning, but when you come to the edge of drowning, you start to gasp, and it's a bad sign. You're actually getting plenty of air, but you don't know you are, and so it's a panic gasp, and so I started gasping, and I still felt I couldn't get enough air, and I knew that I could not make it to that island, so I decided to turn back, and as I averted my eyes back toward the direction I came, I realized I was just as far away from that as I was from the island. And I was pretty sure at that point that I was going to die. And God, or the Army Corps of Engineers, sent a boat. And these people hoisted me out of the water and saved my life. Did I deserve to have my life saved? There's no deserving it. I mean, if you swim out to a place you can't get back from, that's on you, right? In the same way, Jonah, when he said, we were just talking about this, somebody asked me a question about it between the services. When Jonah said, "Throw me overboard," do you think he thought he was going to survive that? He knew that he had violated his trust with God, and he said, "Throw me overboard," expecting, by the way, in a very godlike expectation, that he would die and it would save the sailors. But in a very our godlike way, God decided to help him out. Number one, he helped him out by forgiving him. I have this picture. He expected to die. The sailors expected him to die. I have this picture of God saying, "This was a prophet of mine. I have forgiven him. I forgive you for killing him. Say goodbye now." And he sinks into the water, and nobody hears from Jonah again, and there's no book for us to read. That would have been fair. I mean, reason number 243 why you don't want me as God, because I certainly would have let him die. He disregarded my specific instruction, and he deserved to die. Violated a very special trust. But God saved his life in addition to forgiving him. So he forgave him, and he saved his life. And this is where it gets to be the trifecta, because not only did he forgive him and save his life, he also gave him another opportunity to go back and finish the mission that he'd earlier refused. Now, that doesn't always happen. That's pretty rare. But that is abundant grace. That is grace on a whole other order. Again, reason 243, that you don't want me to be God because I don't have that kind of grace. When you disrespect me like that, I'm very tempted to let you go. Find somebody else. And yet God saved him, he forgave him, and he reinstated him to his mission. You know, God has done that for me, and I know he's done it for a lot of you. And we need to recognize that, I think somewhat frequently, that God is really on our side, unequivocally. This afternoon we're going to have that little rebaptism service. And so while we have some young people here, I see young people up there, and I see young people over here, and a few sprinkled out over here. This is a no names taken sort of a survey that we're going to be doing this afternoon. We're going to rebaptize people, and we're not going to take any lists. But we do have some people who want to be rebaptized who have come to me, and they are going to have trouble with the stairs. Are there any young men here that would be willing to help some people get up those stairs and down into the water? You guys, thank you. If you'd be here at 3, we'd love it if you'd help us. Thank you so much. They may be heavy. Okay. After he volunteers, I tell him. Have you ever not deserved something and gotten it? Have you ever received the thing that you really, really, really didn't deserve? I don't know if you heard about this last summer here in Arkansas. The fellas were digging a ditch, and the one fella dug and he hit something hard, and it was a cannonball from the Civil War. And he threw it up out of the ditch onto the side, and the boss of the job said, "Cool, a Civil War relic." And he picked it up, he put it into his pickup truck, and he buckled it in. And he drove home with it, and he brought it into his house, and he called a Civil War memorabilia buff friend of his, and he described it to him. He says, "That's not a cannonball, that's a landmine." Redeemed how I loved. Well, anyway, so he called the authorities, and they evacuated the whole neighborhood. And the Air Force came, and they took it to a bomb disposal area, and they blew it up. And he didn't get a souvenir even out of that. He was redeemed. He was really redeemed in a miraculous way. I don't know if you've ever gotten what you don't deserve. There's a story of a pastor. This is a true story. And the pastor was doing marital counseling, and he did some counseling with a lady alone. And she told him, "Pastor, 20 years ago I had an affair. And I've felt guilt. I've been weighed down by it all these years." And the pastor talked to her, and he said, "I think you should tell your husband and ask for forgiveness." And when she was leaving her appointment with the pastor, she looked him in the eye, and she said, "If my marriage gets ruined over this, I'm blaming you." And she didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She was deadly serious. And so when she left, the pastor fell to his knees and prayed like he'd never prayed before. She got home to her husband. She told him the story. And he smiled and he said, "I've known all about that for 20 years. I was waiting for you to come and tell me about it. It's forgotten." Have you ever been forgiven when you didn't deserve it? Old Jonah finds himself in a position where God is willing to redeem him. The words in Jonah say, "Then the Lord spoke to Jonah a second time, 'Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh and deliver the message I have given you.'" Isn't it beautiful? God is willing to repeat himself. God has no need to repeat himself. God had many prophets. God could have sent somebody different. He could have sent somebody else. He could have made the rocks cry out. But he sent Jonah a second time with almost the same words. And this time, Jonah obeyed the Lord's command. And he went to Nineveh, a city so large that it took 3 days to see it all. And on the day Jonah entered the city, he shouted to the crowds, 40 days from now, Nineveh will be destroyed." How is a city destroyed in those days? There are lots of ways a city could be destroyed. And in those days, they didn't have first responders, so I don't know what they did. But if an earthquake came to a city, the city became rubble. It was over. A bad earthquake could just destroy a city. Fire was a terrible problem in those days. Everything except the rocks would burn. And so the whole town could burn, especially out there where it gets very, very dry. It could be an insect plague. It could be the disease. You remember what happened in medieval Europe. It could be wind or hail. It could even be a flood. There are lots of ways, and these people apparently had seen cities destroyed before because they were really, really afraid. The people of Nineveh believed God's message, And from the greatest to the least, they declared a fast and put on burlap to show their sorrow. When the king of Nineveh heard what Jonah was saying, he stepped down from his throne and took off his royal robes. He dressed himself in burlap and sat on a heap of ashes. Then the king and his nobles sent a decree throughout the city. No one, not even the animals from your herds and flocks, may eat or drink anything at all. People and animals alike must wear garments of mourning, and everyone must pray earnestly to God. They must turn from their evil ways and stop their violence. Who can tell? Perhaps even yet, God will change his mind and hold back his fierce anger from destroying us. When God saw what they had done and how they had put a stop to their evil ways, he changed his mind and did not carry out the destruction he had threatened. Well, first off, I think it's interesting what his message is. His message is a kind of a hard one. I don't know. It's pretty judgment-based. It reminds me of every guy that you see in the cartoons with the sandwich board that said the end is near, right? All he said is 40 days from now, Nineveh will be destroyed. That great city. Now, there was a lot of buildup to making sure that we knew that it was a great city. And I think the reason is, frankly, remember we found in chapter 1 that Jonah expressed the first angel's message from Revelation 14. So here's a great city, Nineveh, that's about to be destroyed. Then another angel followed him through the sky, shouting, Babylon is fallen. That great city is fallen because she has made the nations of the world drink the wine of her passionate immorality. Then a third angel followed them, shouting, anyone who worships the beast and his statue, or who accepts his mark in the forehead or on the hand, must drink the wine of God's anger. It has been poured out full strength into the cup of wrath. And they will be tormented with fire and burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. The smoke of their torment will rise forever, and they will have no relief day or night, for they have worshipped the beast and his statue and accepted the mark of his name. This is Jonah repeating the three angel messages right here to these people before any of it was coming to place. Now, how do you think it is that these people thought that God might save them? I think they were hoping against hope. But as I was researching this, I found a wonderful text in Jeremiah chapter 18 and verse 7. Here's God speaking. He says, the instant I speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom to pluck them up and pull them down and destroy it, if that nation against whom I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent of the disaster that I have thought to bring upon it. So these people knew enough about God to know that he was a God of mercy. So, what do you think about this evangelism? I was thinking maybe we could have an evangelistic campaign, right? And we could just start with, this world is going to be destroyed, and just leave it out there and see what happens. What do you think? That'd be an effective evangelistic campaign in the 21st century? Maybe, maybe not. Jonah's message was a message of truth. There's no question that it was a message of truth. Through the history of our denomination, we have preached truth. And when we preach truth, we often baptize people. And I have found in my own anecdotal research that the people that we baptize are typically people who already know who God is and who are interested in serving God in truth, and they find more truth here than they found where they came from, and they come to this church and they get rebaptized or take a profession of faith, and they say, we want to be part of the More Truth Church. And I think that would be a good name. You know, Ellen and the gang named it the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I think the More Truth Church would be a good name for our church, because we have a comprehensive system of theology and doctrine that is more complete than any other church that I've ever found. The problem with preaching the more truth is that sometimes we find people get baptized, and then a year later, we can't find them anymore. Truth alone is good. Truth plus love is better. There is a lot of really credible research that says that if a Seventh-day Adventist church loves people, sticks with the truth, prays fervently, and is healthy and functional, that people, non-Seventh-day Adventists, will come and join the church without any evangelistic campaign at all. Have you ever been a member of that church? I have. People just come and they say, wow, this is a great group of people. What do you guys believe? Once had a man look us up on the internet. He said, you know, I know that thing about an everlasting, eternal, unending hell, that can't be the God I worship. He said, so I looked up churches that believe that hell is temporal, and I saw yours. He said, and he came and interviewed us, interviewed the church to see if he wanted to be a member. He said, we know you have the truth, but do you love us? That was the question. And so we did our best to act like we loved him. And we ultimately came to love him. And he and his wife became members of our church. They came to us to see if we loved them. Do you think that the Ninevites felt the love from Jonah? Yeah, me either. It wasn't good because he didn't love them. In fact, he hated them. In fact, he could see the handwriting on the wall. He knew that Nineveh was a growing power and that the 10 tribes of northern Israel were a faltering power. And he probably knew from prophetic experience that it would be the Ninevites who came and ultimately took the northern tribes into captivity, and at which time and after which time the northern tribes of Israel were known as the lost tribes of Israel, and they haven't been found till yet today. The end of the northern tribes was just a generation or so away. I think Jonah knew that, and that's why he hated them. And he did not want to preach to them. So there are two pieces to evangelism. Piece one is clearly truth. And piece two, well, let's just read it. Jesus gives us the mission statement for all evangelism. It's in Matthew 28, 18 through 20. It says, I have been given all authority on heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the earth. Those of you who come on Wednesday night know that we study the literary types a lot. And this is a fascinating literary type. This is absolutely a chiasm. The first line, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth, is matched by the promise at the end. And be sure of this, I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. You see how they go together? One is a promise that he has the power, and the last is a promise that he will share the power. And in the middle, we also have a chiasm. It says, therefore go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them to obey all the commands I have given you. Now, that talks about something more than just teaching. He says, make disciples. Did Jonah make any disciples? No. These people were saved from destruction, but no disciples were made, and in a generation they overran Israel. What is God's plan for evangelism? What is God's plan in our family for evangelism? He gives us that too. He tells us that his plan for evangelism, he says, I am praying not only for these disciples, but also for those they will evangelize. That is, also for all who will ever believe through their message. I pray that they will all be one, just as you and I are one. As you are in me, Father, and I am in you, and may they be in us, so that the world will believe that you sent me. So there's this soccer player by the name of Gavin Peacock. I don't know. I don't follow soccer, but he was in England. He was actually an Englishman in England who actually was a great soccer player. He's primarily remembered for something called a hat trick. Anybody knows what a hat trick is? His team in the English Soccer League was down 3-0. And he made 3 goals in a row And with the fourth goal, they won. They came back from 3-0 and won 4-3 because of 3 goals, 2 of which came off of his head, believe it or not. Gavin is a tremendous soccer player. When he was 17 years old, he was drafted into the soccer leagues, the professional soccer leagues. He bought the car of his dreams. He had all the money that a young man could want to spend and all of the notoriety and fame, and he thought that he was on top of the world, but he felt empty. And he did something that almost no Europeans do anymore. He went to a church. And he sat in a church, and there in the church, there were some people who invited him home to a youth group. And here's what he said about that meeting. When they spoke about Jesus, they displayed a life and joy that I did not have. They talked about sin as if it had consequences, and about God as if they knew Him. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Wouldn't that be beautiful if our lives were marked by exactly that? So Gavin finished his career with the soccer world and became a full-time minister. And he preaches every week. Now, there was an article in the newspaper this week. Many of you may have seen it. It says that trees apparently can communicate. Did anybody see that one? So it turns out that trees' roots overlap. And between the roots and their fibers in the ground, they have fungus that grows. And this fungus actually is able to communicate chemical signals between the trees through the roots and through the fungus. They've done a lot of research. This is amazing, and I'm not teasing you. This is true. And so when a tree is in trouble nutritionally, other trees can actually send nutrients through the soil, through the fungus, to the weaker tree to help build it up. Now, the very first thing I thought of is, if trees have community, what about that birch that nobody likes? Because he's not going anywhere. Doesn't bother anybody else? Just me. Okay. I mean, if you're a tree, you've got to like those other trees because they're not going anywhere. If you're a person who's a part of the forever family, those other people, they're going to be living in eternity with you. You better mingle your roots now. They need to feel the love in the same way that the Ninevites did not feel Jonah's love. It's interesting, in the 70s or 80s, I guess it was 70s, a guy named George Lucas wrote some stories. You've probably heard them. And they talk about a world in which good and evil is pretty brightly divided. And he describes the world of good as a group of people who care about each other selflessly and courageously. And he talks about the evil as a group of people who are fearful and greedy and angry and hateful and violent. And he calls it the dark side. Sometimes I'm tempted to live out the dark side. I read a book by David Platt, and in David Platt's, he was a missionary all around the world, and he came back to the Southeast, and he had just come back from all of these mission adventures where people study all night and people evangelize aggressively, even though it's against the law and they can go to prison for it. And he came back and he started telling the stories of these mighty warriors for God. And he's in a group of southern gentle people living in the living room and visiting and listening to him. And one of the deacons there said, "You know, I appreciate what you do over there." He said, "But as far as I'm concerned, I just wish God would wipe them all out." And many of the other gentlemen in that room agreed with him wholeheartedly. The Ninevites didn't dress like Jonah. They didn't talk like Jonah. They didn't smell like Jonah. They didn't act like Jonah. And for these reasons, and because of Jonah's fear, Jonah went to the dark side and believed that God was a zero-sum God, and there was not enough love to go around to the Ninevites and to Jonah. I believe God calls us to love those who are unloved and to seek those who are lost, no matter how different from us they are. Mr. Rogers, everybody grew up watching Mr. Rogers, right? Was he still around? No? We all grew up watching he was such a nice man. Mr. Rogers had a very, very low-key television show. And in his low-key television show, it turns out, for those of you who remember him, he actually wrote all the songs in the show. He actually sang that introductory song, Won't You Be My Neighbor, and the end piece of the song. He sang them fresh every week. Didn't use a recording. He sang them again every week. Early on in the show, he realized that he wanted an officer of the law in his show. And so he invented the character Mr. Clemens, Officer Clemens. I don't know if any of you remember Officer Clemens, but Officer Clemens was an African-American fellow. And this started in 1969 when African-American fellows and law officers were not necessarily on the best of terms. You don't remember 1969? In 1969, there were riots all over the northern United States and many in the southern United States. So Officer Clemens, he didn't know if he really wanted to take the job. But he took the job, and day after day, he played Officer Clemens. One day, after many years of playing Officer Clemens, there's a famous episode in which Mr. Rogers is sitting outside with his feet in a little kiddie pool, cooling off, and Officer Clemens comes by, and Mr. Rogers invites him to take his shoes and socks off and to join him there. And they sit down together and they sing a beautiful song that Mr. Rogers wrote. And afterwards, when Mr. Clemens says he has to go back to work, he takes out a towel and Mr. Rogers dries his feet off and he puts his shoes back on and he goes to walk his beat. At the end of the show, when Mr. Rogers was singing his song, Mr. Clemens was standing next to the cameraman. And Mr. Rogers' song, of course, is an appeal song. It's a love song. He says, "Won't you be my neighbor?" And Officer Clemens came to him afterwards and he said, "Were you singing that just to me? It sounded like you were singing that just to me. You were talking just to me." And Mr. Rogers says, "I've been talking just to you for years. You just heard me today." Are we speaking? Are we speaking love to those who are different from us? Or are we cloistering ourselves with the people who are just like us? A fellow named Gene Veneer tells a story about a friend of his that lived in Paris. He said, "I know a man who lives in Paris. His wife has Alzheimer's. He was an important businessman. His life was filled with busyness. But he said that when his wife fell sick, I just couldn't put her into an institution, so I kept her. I fed her. I bathed her." Veneer says, "I went to Paris to visit them, and this businessman who had been so very busy all his life said, 'I have changed. I have become more human.' I got a letter from him recently. He said that in the middle of the night, his wife woke him up. She came out of her fog for a moment, and she said, 'Darling, I just want to say thank you for all you're doing for me.' And then she fell back into her fog, and he wept and he wept." Jesus calls us to love those not only who we are not naturally disposed to love, but those who cannot or will not love us back. He calls us to love those who will hate us back, and even those who will kill us. He calls us to love them with the same love that He loved us when we we're in frank rebellion against Him. What does it mean to love those who cannot, will not, and refuse to love us back? It's hard. It's hard. But it is the gospel. And without our love, the truth will not hold them. Give me your eyes for just 1 second. Give me your eyes so I can see everything I keep missing. Give me your love for humanity. Give me your arms for the brokenhearted, the ones that are far beyond my reach. Give me your heart for the ones forgotten. Give me your eyes so I can see. We have people in this community that we don't know. This whole town is 6,500 people. And there are people that live within 100 yards of here that this church doesn't know, has never reached out to. There are people on the other side of the planet. People who die by their thousands of starvation every day. I'm proud to be a part of a church that has a global and worldwide mission that through ADRA and so many other branches helps people. But do I really care? Jesus cared enough to leave heaven to come for us. And we need to care enough to love those that Jesus died for. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, today, we ask for forgiveness when we have thought things like, oh, just wipe them all out. We ask forgiveness for having our special favorites and rejecting, shunning, avoiding the rest. Please open our eyes to see the lovely opportunity to enlarge your kingdom that touches us every day. Help us to know the people that you would have us to know, to bring them to your family. Please help us to have concern, care, love, and equal feelings for those who are different from us, those who are hungry, those who are suffering. Please, God, help us to have the courage to enlarge your kingdom and to break down the doors of hell. We know that this is your will for us, and so we claim it in Jesus' name. Amen. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.